Good morning and welcome. My name is Olivia Zink, and I'm the Executive Director at Open Democracy. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit working to address structural democracy reform, voting rights, campaign finance reform, and redistricting. And we're working to build grassroots teams. And today's training is all about equipping your teams with the skills needed for success. So I wish we could see you in person today, but it's wonderful to see all of your faces on the computer. And thank you so much for joining us via Zoom this morning. We have a remarkable training planned for you today. I want to introduce our trainers, Gerri King and Steve Scudder. And Gerri is a global superstar. She has authored a book, a book on management and leadership, dispelling the common leadership myths. And Steve is a lawyer who has worked tirelessly leading pro bono legal services both in the state and nationally. So it's wonderful to have both of their outstanding commitments to public service joining us today.
I'm just going to quickly review the agenda. Today's agenda, Gerri King will talk about managing teams. Then we will go at 10 o'clock to strategies on effective recruitment and how to use volunteers. And then we'll have a short break and go back to the art of facilitation. I really want to thank my team, Brian Beal and Doreen Damaris, for all of the amazing work that they did to help make this event successful. I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk a little bit about the Zoom etiquette.
Hi, everybody. Some of you are new to Zoom, and we do have a graphic which we're going to show you that just shows you some basics about your Zoom screen. But up in the right-hand corner, you can control the view. You can either look at gallery view or at speaker view, and if it's in speaker view, the speaker will be larger in the middle of your screen. If you take your mouse and you go down to the bottom of where all the pictures are, your toolbar is going to pop up, and in the lower left there's a mute button, so you can mute and unmute yourself. But we would appreciate you staying muted until you're recognized, and there's a way to raise your hand for a question, so that with this many people, that makes it a whole lot easier. The stop video button next to that turns your video, your personal video, on and off. So if you decide that you want to get naked and run around the room, please turn your video off. If the managed participants, if you see the participants, that will allow you to be able to raise your hand. You'll see a little spot there to be able to raise your hand for a question, and then we'll be monitoring that, and we'll give you a chance to ask your question. However, most questions we would prefer to have in chat. That is a whole lot easier for us to be able to do that, and then we'll read your question out loud and get that question answered for you by our presenters. And then if you need to leave the presentation today, there's a button or a link in your lower right-hand corner that we've got circled there, and if you need to do that. Now, between the presentations today, we're going to just be leaving the channel open. There'll be a graphic that says we're going to come back in a few minutes, when at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, we will begin the presentations promptly. Thank you all for your cooperation. And our folks on the phone, this is an important one. You do *6 to mute and unmute yourself on the phone, so we don't get any barking dogs or crying babies. We appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And we will be recording this meeting. If you do not want your face recorded, you can go off camera or not sound. But if you do ask a question or have your video on, we are recording this for future use as well. So I see that Gerri, we're going to turn it back over to Gerri to begin her presentation.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Great. Good to be with you all, although with you should probably be in quotes. As I was putting this together, the teaming piece this morning and later in the morning facilitation, I started wondering and pondering as to whether I should be doing something different because we're working remotely so often now, and realized the underlying dynamics and the requirements are pretty much the same. There are some slight differences, and we can talk about those. I'm going to be chatting with you for a while and then entertaining questions that will be facilitated by Olivia. I'm looking forward to those. I like to start out my presentations the same way, and that is to remind you when you're hearing any presentation at all, take what makes sense, throw out what doesn't, and put on the shelf what you want to take down someday. I've learned to trust my audience. I used to say a lot, this is my opinion. Of course it's my opinion, I'm talking. I assume when you're talking, it's your opinion. So feel free again to question, to give feedback, or to give some response, and we'll certainly leave enough time for that later. I want to talk first about what we know about teams. They're very much like family, whether it's a work team or a volunteer team. You may have noticed you hear the same things in those groups that you hear at home. You're in my chair, you took my paper, they like them better than they like us. That's because families were our first group. That's how we learned to be in a group. You may be just like your nuclear family, you may be quite the opposite, but you made choices along the way. Now, if we were in a room together, I would ask people to raise their hands. I can't see everybody on the screen, so I won't do that. But I often ask to find out how many people came from families that were 5 or more kids, and they're usually a lot. And then I sound like an auctioneer. How about 7 or more or 8 or more? I was in Wisconsin. There was a guy who was one of 13. He was talking about his mother, and someone said, "Oh, your mom's still living?" And his response was, "Yes, she just keeps mumbling, if I live long enough, I'll have a day by myself." I also then ask how many people, like me, are only children, and I can be in a room of hundreds of people and very few people raise their hands. But the reason I bring this up when talking about teams is when sibling rivalry kinds of stuff starts happening, only children look really baffled. We viscerally don't get it. I used to be a psychotherapist, I used to do family therapy, and I used to have to work so hard to understand sibling rivalry. My family didn't have much, but there wasn't a line down the middle of my room and no one was taking my toys or later my clothes. I have permission to tell this story, wouldn't do it without it. My husband and I have been married about 1,000 years. He's one of 3. And to this day, if we're cutting cake, he still looks to see how big my piece is. Our son's long out of the house. He could have the rest of the cake. Those with you with siblings know that doesn't matter. One day I said to him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I don't know, I can't stop." So I bring this up because those dynamics are familiar and often surprising. Now, when we're talking about teams, if there is a leader, and we'll talk about this later as well, we have to talk about power. Power is the ability to influence. So if we want a team, from my perspective, that works really, really well, I believe in shared power. Shared power is influence based on expertise, not on role, and it's based on knowledge, not position. So if I'm in charge and you're talking about your area of expertise, you have far more power and should than I do. When we evolve into shared power, people's commitment is just extraordinary. You can see it start to lift. And that's because people who are involved or doing the job every day know how to solve the problems. So what we have to ask ourselves is, do you think people ever leave a meeting saying, "If they only asked me"? And I am convinced that they do that in parking lots outside their employment offices. They do that as they're walking out of a meeting on a volunteer basis. And we do need to ask them and invite them and truly want that sincerely. It's also important to know that new people have a wealth of information. And so we have veterans who have been maybe working on the team for quite some time, and they thankfully have organizational wisdom. New people get to ask naive questions. They get to ask questions that we might not have thought about. For instance, something simple like, is there a reason we do this way? And if our only answer is we always have, we might want to look at that. Some of you may know that story about the two people making a pot roast, and before putting it in the oven, one of them slices off the end. And the other says, what are you doing? He says, I don't know, my folks always did it. Why? I have no idea. So they call the parents, and the parents say, Grandma and Grandpa did it. Finally, clearly nobody knows. They all travel to Grandmas and Grandpas and say, we're making your pot roast, and we're slicing off the end, and we don't know why. And Grandpa says, I don't know why you did it. We did it because our pan was too small. So that is why it's so important to find the answers to those questions and ask the question, should we continue doing what we've been doing all along? We also know that teams often work in silos because they have different missions. They have things that they have to do. And I hear increasingly, again, whether it's in the workplace or with volunteer organizations, that the silos are problematic. They separate us. My question is, what are the benefits? Because we do what we do because it works for us at some level. And until we identify the benefits, and often people will say there are none, and I'll urge them to, let's just make a list. And the list is really long, meaning people leave us alone. We get to do what we want to do. We aren't answering to a ton of people. Stop for a minute and say, are we willing to give that up? Because if we're not, we're going to continue to work in silos. Now, we all often have as a model sports teams, and I love sports, but it is not a good model for working groups because the sports model is who beats whom. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ultimately working for the same goal or same goals. And so when we split up and say our group is doing better than others, that's problematic and we have to think about it. So I'm going to ask Olivia now if you would put up that sheet that I shared, because we need to talk about the developmental stages of groups. There it is. There's also a handout that's available to you for your notes for today. This reminds me that I should be sharing with you how you communicate with people. They've now identified 62 different learning styles, which is shocking and overwhelming, of course. But if you do at least 3, meaning for auditory learners, you talk to them. For visual learners, you provide something that they can look at now or later. And for experiential learners, we show them. Interestingly, if you ask most people what their learning style is, most people don't know. What they say is, I was lousy in math, I was bad at languages, I wasn't good at science. Had they been taught a different way, they might have been fine. So think about your own learning style sometime and see if you can truly identify it. Well, what we have up here is a visual. Groups go through very predictable stages. And by the way, a group is 2 or more people. It is so predictable that when I'm in a group, just for fun, I sometimes try to challenge it or sabotage it, and I can't. They form, they storm, they norm, they perform, and they adjourn. The forming is about how we get to know each other, understanding each other's styles and our work styles and our communication styles, finding out who people are. I'll give you an example. If you go to a party, next time you go to a party, if any of us ever get to go to a party again, notice how it's very quiet at the beginning. People are only talking to the people with whom they came, and they're being quite subtle about that until the cheddar cheese and little hot dogs come out. Now they're having intense conversations with strangers about cheddar cheese and little hot dogs. It's not perhaps because they like the food so much, it's because we now have a shared experience. And people will start interacting outside their own group, their initial group, and as I said, the volume will go up. I spent a lot of time after Hurricane Katrina working in New Orleans. And people said the only good thing about this is that it brought our neighborhood together, it brought our family together. I have no doubt that groups come together in a crisis. I have no doubt they come together when there's a deadline. However, we want teams to be together when that's not happening, when there isn't any drama. That's why it's so important to take the time. It is not a waste of time. It's a really important time to get to know one another. The second is storming, and this is when people think their teams are falling apart because it starts to get a little more conflictual or there's a little more tension. Actually, they're not falling apart, and it helps to share all this, by the way, with your team members so they realize they're within the norm. The storming stage is to find out if it's okay to have a diversity of thought and if we have a safe way to handle it. Now, we all say we love diversity, and yet we want people to think just like we do. I don't know why I have the guts to say this to people I can't see, but as an example, try being a Yankees fan in New Hampshire. It is not an easy thing to do. I grew up in Connecticut where half the people were Yankees fans and half Red Sox fans, and spent a lot of my childhood in Yankee Stadium with my dad. My dad died when I was 21. So to honor him, I raised our son a Yankees fan, except in New Hampshire. He came home from middle school one day and said, like, life isn't hard enough. Though when I talk again about embracing this diversity, we need it. Because what's the point of having all these people around the table if we don't want diversity of thought? That's when storming becomes a little more intense. And then there's norming. Norming is how we meet, where we sit when we meet. By the way, when a new person comes, you realize you were attached to that seat because when that person sits in your seat, you're a little unnerved by it. It's little things like that. It's how you get your coffee or your tea. And it's also the acronyms and the terms we use. None of us would purposefully marginalize anybody on the team. But we are marginalizing new people when we use acronyms and terminology that they don't understand. So I urge you, please, to have a glossary. As you're thinking about it, add it to the glossary. People will not ask 25 times during a meeting, what are you talking about? But so often the newest people leave saying, I had no idea. Now look where performing is. It doesn't mean that we don't perform at some level, but it's almost impossible to perform at the highest level until we've been through those stages. My favorite, because I find it the most interesting, is adjourning. Adjourning is, of course, if the team disappears or dissipates. It's also if just one person comes or one person leaves. It is not the same group. You are not back to zero, but you are back to reforming. So let us remember when new people are coming or folks are leaving, we are reconfiguring and we can expect to go through those stages. So thanks, Olivia, for bringing that up. We won't need it now. And we'll get back to some issues around communication. When I talk about diversity of thought, we need to look at our teams. We need to look around and say, do we have enough? I mean, it's wonderful that we all care about the cause. It's wonderful that we all care about the mission. Do we need some people reminding us that they don't care quite as much or they think very differently about it? Because when we go out to the public, we're often surprised by their not wanting to hear what we have to say. I also need to talk some about conflict, which is really hard for people to talk about, especially when we do share a mission and we do share a goal. We're really shocked that people don't think like us about everything. Try ordering pizza and have the person next to you say, how could you want this person to win an election and you want anchovies? We really have this expectation, even of course we know logically that's not going to happen. So conflict is usually not about the issue. It's about how we respond to it. It's about stylistic difference. If you and I were in a room having an argument about something, we walked out and people said, what did you argue about? We might say politics. We might say there are so many things we'd say, but I guarantee you that that took a very short amount of time. Most of our conversation would be, why are you talking to me like that? You always respond to me like that. I did not like your reaction. Stop when that's going on, please, and talk about our stylistic differences. There are actually exercises out there if you're an ongoing team that you might want to take so you can share with people. If you raise your voice to me, I'll think you're furious with me because it's the only time I'd ever raise my voice. Maybe your voice gets louder when you're excited about something. If you walk away, I'll think you're discounting me. Unless I understand that you walk away, you gather your thoughts and you come back in 5 minutes. We're not talking here about excuses. We're talking about explanations. An excuse is, this is who I am, you just have to live with it. An explanation is, this is who I am, this is who you are. How are we going to negotiate that? And by the way, the two major reasons for conflict in organizations are role confusion and lack of a clear process. Watch what people argue about. I thought you were doing this. I thought I was doing this. I thought we were doing it this way or that way. Stop as soon as that happens and clarify our process, clarify our roles. Interestingly, people are doing this because they care, because they think they should do it a certain way. I have colleagues who think 85% of conflict in organizations would disappear if we did that. I don't think it's that high, but even if 20% disappears, wouldn't that be wonderful? We also need to be able to give feedback to each other. Feedback's only worthwhile if people can do something about it. For me to say to someone, you're too tall, is lousy feedback. Now, of course, you wouldn't say that, but we say things like it all the time. When we say, get with the program, or you have to do a better job. When we say that, there's no way for the person to measure what your expectation is. It breaks my heart when I hear people say, I was told I had to be more conscientious. I changed 5 things. Turned out that was the 6th they were looking for. We would hope people would ask, how are you measuring it? Most people won't. We have to remind ourselves to do that. This is part of the problem, by the way, with email and texting, which we're all doing far more now than we did before. People read the email in the mood they're in, not in the mood it was sent. So if I email you and say, did you do that report? If you feel guilty about not doing it, you'll think I'm chastising you. If I were in front of you, you wouldn't think that. Please, if there is tension in an email or a text, stop after 2 exchanges. I promise you it won't get better. It'd be great to meet with the person in person. However, you can also get on the phone. If in fact we do have an argument going, great, we can continue it. But what if we don't? So as much as email and texting has helped us, it has also hurt our communication because we misread it often. And texting has caused anxiety. By the way, some of you may know that the sound of the text releases dopamine. It is one of the reasons that it's addictive. It's also addictive because we're saying, ooh, somebody wants us. When I say it's also caused anxiety, I tell my son and daughter-in-law the reason I don't initiate texts is if you don't respond right away, I think you drowned. And proximity to water has nothing to do with it. So what we have to do is to mitigate those circumstances to the best we can. Also, because of texting and emails, we now have an expectation that we should respond immediately. And I'm sure you've had this. People say, I emailed you 6 minutes ago. I guess, how is it you didn't respond? People are insulted by that lack of response. Very few things have to be responded to immediately. If someone says, I need an answer now, and you say to them, I could give you an answer, but I could give you a much better answer if I research it, what are they going to say? I'd like a lousy answer now? Or if you say, I could give you the answer, but Jane does this all the time. She's really the person you should be speaking with. What are they going to say? No, you're in charge of the team. I want the answer from you, even though you don't have as much information. So essentially what you're doing is putting it back on them. Just a couple of more things before we go to questions. One of the things that I've realized, and I have trouble with it too, is people have trouble asking for help. Keep in mind when you ask somebody for help, someone on the team, someone on another team, you're giving them a gift. If you ask me for help, the message also is when I need help, I can ask you. So if we're willing to take the parameters, meaning I'm asking you for help and you say, I can't do it now, but I might be able to tomorrow, cool. Because by the way, I'm going to ask you again because you're being truthful to me. We have this consistent way of thinking, no, I have to do it myself. People are too busy. I should not make that decision for my team member. Let that team member make the decision and let me know. We also have this piece of not wanting to ask questions. People need their say. They do not need their way. They do need to know why they didn't get their way. And that's the piece that's often left out. So if we say, give us some input, I need to get back to you specifically and say, this was a great idea. We don't have the budget for it. This we can do. This we have to put off. And this we can't do for this reason. People are very cool with that. They are not cool with the perception that they've been ignored. The last thing I'm going to suggest, I always leave it to the end because you need time to roll your eyes and say, yeah, right. And that is that you create a culture that's blame-free and gossip-free. So, yeah, right. I've been doing this for years, talking about this for years with zero success, by the way. Sadly, in the last year and a half or so, I've probably had 4 and 5 gigs a month on this topic. And I say sadly because the reason I do is people aren't being as kind and nice to each other as they used to. We can all come up with reasons why that might be true. So I just want to share with you the possibility that your group, that your team, that your organization could do this. They're really easy concepts to understand and very hard to do. Eliminating blame is it doesn't matter who's to blame. What matters is what's not working gets fixed. Pushback I often get is that, well, then people won't be accountable. Actually, they're more accountable in a blame-free environment because they know there's not a punitive response. If someone says, I screwed up, I messed up, I didn't do what I was supposed to do, the response is, in a blame-free environment, what do you think happened? Can we change something systemically? What do you think's going on? Maybe the person is being asked to do something that he or she is not qualified for and would much rather do something else. Gossip-free is you talk to people instead of about them. Also easy to understand, also hard to do. It does not matter that we have something to say to someone. What matters is, are we talking directly to the person? And by the way, we do support each other still. So if you come to me because you're having trouble with your team member, I don't push you away. What I say is, how can I help you figure out how to talk to them? So I'm still supporting you, but the point is you need to talk to someone else. And that includes talking to a supervisor about colleagues. That includes talking to the team leader about team members. Most people will say, if they have 2 or more kids, when one of the kids complains about the other, they say, please work it out with your brother or sister. It's very interesting to me. We do not do that organizationally. So the response should be the same. How can I help you talk to your colleague? I would just add one thing. I do have an organization. All stories I tell you are from 3,000 miles away for confidentiality reasons. But I have an organization that's gossip-free, and I was all excited, and I said, this is so cool. What's it like to work here? And this guy said, it is the most boring place on earth. We have no one to talk about. We're taping soap operas, so we have someone to talk about. What he also said is when I walk by the coffee pot and people are giggling or whispering, I know they're not talking about me because they'd be talking to me. When my supervisor comes in and looks grouchy, if I don't hear about it within 5 minutes, I know it has nothing to do with me because I'd hear about it within 5 minutes. So I urge you to consider on your teams or in any part of your world to be blameful, I mean, not be blameless. Oh, Ford would have loved that. And to not gossip. Know that it takes several months to get there because both are very habitual. What we know is when we're working on the kinds of causes you're working on, that's what's important. And if we're struggling with one of our team members or several, it's very important that we process that. So now we get to the point where you get to stump the speaker. Do you have any questions, Olivia, that have come into you?
Yeah, there's a few, and I want to thank all of you who are members of our democracy team. I see leaders from the North Conway team and the Seacoast team and the Monadnock team. And so as we're building democracy teams to influence the structural reform we want, these skills are really important. I'm going to go to Kate Kuhn first from Peterborough, who's part of the League of Women Voters and Open Democracy with her first question. Kate, if you want to unmute yourself. From the chat box. I love your comment about rethinking teams, rethinking groups. Is Kate not unmuted?
I think she's still muted.
She was unmuted and she muted herself.
Myself, sorry.
Yeah.
What did I say about teams? I said this reminds me of every team I'm in. So, and I'm in a bunch, and so I'm thinking already about, and Brian or Olivia, coach me if I'm forgetting a piece of the question, but it makes me think of my League of Women Voters Steering Committee. We've gone through a lot of those things, and I thought, I think I know the birth order of everybody, but I think that's one of the first things I would sort of suss out, because as soon as you said that, I get like, oh, I see how that's impacting this friendship, this frenemyship, you know, a lot of things. And, you know, the gossip-free thing, oh my God, it's so true. We're in this community task force on housing, and that's one of our rules, but gossip is very energizing. It's probably like the dopamine on a text. You know, it kind of fires us up and makes us feel solidarity with another person. So anyway, I don't know if that's the question. It's maybe more of a comment, but this is, what I said too is in the first, you'd only been talking about 10 minutes and I already felt like I'd learned so much useful stuff. I'm scribbling everything down.
Aren't you
we'll get notes, so.
I want to say something. I'm glad you brought that up about gossip. Giving it up is tough for many reasons. One is, as I said, it's habitual. But secondly, if there are 5 of us talking about other people, it's really great. I'm in the in-group. Of course, I'm afraid to leave because you're going to start talking about me when I do. It's sort of like when someone whispers to you, I have something to tell you I shouldn't be telling you. And the message is, I better not tell that person anything I don't want anybody else to know. So we are losing a lot. Again, I'll reiterate, we do what we do because it works for us in some way. So thank you for bringing that up.
Great, and I'm going to go to Linda Rhodes next, if you want to unmute yourself, but her questions is around sort of starting up groups, but then also when do you feel more able to take risks and be creative? But Linda, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure, yeah, thank you. I'll try to put my video on. I have a bad internet signal, so sometimes my video doesn't work very well. But there we go. So yeah, I come from a world with a lot of innovative startup companies, and one of the things I've noticed that some of these companies do, which is I think really risky and interesting, is that they actually hold group celebrations of people who fail at something. And they reward them. They give them a bonus or a trophy or something. You tried a project, you took a risk, it didn't work out, but hey, you tried. And it creates a culture where people feel a little freer to be more creative. What's your feeling about that kind of group dynamic?
I find it fascinating. There are more and more companies doing that, giving bonuses for failures. And the reason they're doing that is they weren't having enough successes because they weren't getting enough suggestions.
Right.
People were afraid to come forward. They were afraid it wouldn't work. So now they're saying, come forward. We will have more failures, but we'll have far more successes as a result. And the only way they could figure out how to do this was to give a bonus for a suggestion. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it dynamic where people feel a little freer to float what might be crazy ideas, but in that environment, then you have to be pretty non-judgmental as a group.
Exactly.
It's not just the bonus at the end. It's that the group has to say, well, that's a weird idea. No, nobody's ever thought of that. Like, sure, let's give it a go. Whereas often in groups, you get the opposite. Well, that's crazy. We'd never do that. So that creating that dynamic of where you can shift towards, thinking about new ideas and new ways of doing things, I think is really tricky.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We're going to go to Stan Freeman. I mispronounced your last name, Stan, but go ahead.
That's okay. I was just sort of talking about the comments of texting and emails, and I know that in these days we're getting more video, and so it's easier to see the multidimensional feedback. You can see if I'm smiling or if I'm angry or whatever, or you can hear the tone of my voice. But if you're just doing texting, like you were talking about before, do you have any ideas about different kind of norms you can set for the meeting so that you avoid those misinterpretations, like using emoticons or something to tell whether I'm angry or whether I'm just joking or being smarmy on purpose for fun or being smart because I'm in a pissy mood,
I was going to talk about this some when I talked about facilitation, but I'll talk about it now because it came up. This is a startling statistic. 65 to 85% of communication is body language. Not the words you say, not the words you write. It's your tone of voice, it's your eyes, it's how you move. Here's the creepy part. You are the least knowledgeable person on earth about your own body language. Where would you see it? When you're in front of a mirror, you're combing your hair or brushing your teeth. So everyone who sees you, even for a few minutes, knows more about your body language than you know about your own. Now, I'm not suggesting you pay attention to, first of all, how would you change your body language if you don't know what it looks like? My avocation is theater. And years ago, I was choreographing a show and a woman came in who said, I don't know what to do with my arms. I said, that's easy. You do the same thing with your arms that you do when you walk. And this glaze came over her face. She never thought about what she did when she walked. And she started, you can't see me, my whole body, but she started walking toward me like this. And I thought, fine, this is great. The woman came in unable to dance. She's now going out unable to walk. This is what I've done for her. And to this day, and it's probably been 12 to 15 years, she sees me in the supermarket and she can't take another step. So this is what happens when we think about it. What I will say, if we can see each other's body language, if what you're saying matches what you're thinking, your body language is more congruent. Now I challenge you. How often are you saying one thing and thinking another? How often are you saying, oh, sure, this is a fine time to talk? How often are you saying, yeah, fine, sure, I agree with you, and your face doesn't show it? There are times, and this is important for the group, by the way, that what you're saying does match what you're thinking, and people misunderstand it. So gossiping in our heads can be just as difficult, by the way, and destructive. If somebody says to you, are you mad at me? You just squinted your eyes. I get to say, no, my contact lenses are dry. We need an environment where people can ask those questions. We need an environment, and the reason we need that environment are assumptions, our guesses, we begin to believe. So when I look at you, if you don't look happy, I'll think you're mad at me. That's an assumption, and within seconds, I believe that. And now I'm mad at you for being mad at me. You were never mad at me. Now you're mad at me because you thought I was mad at you because I thought you were mad at me. And that's what happens if we don't check it out. In terms of texting, it's problematic because at least in emails, we sometimes say, dear so-and-so, or hello, or sincerely. We don't do that in texts. Everything sounds like an order. Everything sounds like a presumption. So you can add those. I will tell you now with emojis, people are beginning to think that they're sarcastic. So I'm not even sure that's helping. I think if you put a heart in it, it's helpful. But beyond that, I'm not sure about the facial emojis.
Yeah, and it's all different about who you're communicating with. I have a 10-year-old who sends me unicorns. So
exactly.
You never know what's going on. The next question we're going to go to William is about volunteer groups, conflict and interpersonal challenges, and maintaining focus and commitment.
Yeah, hi everyone. Your presentation Jerry, was very interesting, but it seemed to me to apply more to work situations that I've been in, the workplace rather than the volunteer group environment. Now, the volunteer group environments that I'm used to and involved in right now, you might meet once a month, and there might be a little bit of email in between meetings. But there's no opportunities for gossip, really. And so that's not an issue. And some of the other interpersonal dynamics you talked about, they don't really come up very often. But what does come up all the time, I think, is kind of maintaining commitment, and focus of the group, and just getting the work done, because it's everything's purely voluntary, and you're not seeing each other every day or even every week. So that's I think that's a little bit of a different type of situation. So I just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Right. I used to separate them. I'm less and less doing that, as I didn't do here, because they are starting to replicate work situations. And again, you point out it depends on how often you're meeting and getting together. I do want to say that there's very little difference in terms of the dynamics. The difference is what you just mentioned. People are volunteering, which implies that our expectations are not the same as they would be in the workplace. I would like to make the argument they should be the same.
Okay.
Now, Stephen's going to be talking about volunteers, and I can't wait to hear what he says. My feeling is there should be job descriptions. We should have standards. And when we can't do something, we should have to explain it in the same way we would in the workplace. It's very hard to say, oh, these people are just doing what they can when they can. If they tell you specifically, and this is what I love about Kent Street, this is all we can do, and you know the parameters, that's terrific. The problem is when we don't know.
Okay.
And we had an expectation of someone, the report never came in, or the response never came in, and now we're upset and distressed about it. So I do think there are similarities. I do think the thing that is not similar is we're not together as often for that long a time, which may have its advantages. I think there are lots of disadvantages associated with that. But thanks for pointing that out.
Next, we're going to head over to Bev Cotton's question.
Hi. It's a sort of a comment I was just listening to William, and my experience with volunteer groups is very different from that. My experience with volunteer groups is we're almost like a textbook picture of Gerri's outline and those phases. And we as a group, even subcommittee groups that may be just 3 or 4 or 5 people, you sort of learn, people who's going to commit and who's going to really follow through and who's going to raise their hand every time and drop the ball as soon as you turn your back. And you sort of learn those things, and then those conflict sort of parts kind of come into play, and the difficulty is there. But then you just sort of learn, okay, this is that person's strong point. I can count on that person for this. This is what this person does well. So I find that volunteer groups very much fit your descriptions and what you've talked about so far. The difference for me is I come from a very corporate background prior to now, and you have very much more leverage when you're dealing with employees and setting expectations and goals and deliverables, and there are consequences for people not meeting those obligations where you don't have that same leverage with volunteers. So that was a learning curve for me, to have to approach volunteer work quite a bit differently than the corporate work that I was involved in before.
And perhaps I believe in punishment-free environments, so I don't mean the consequential piece, but perhaps, again, we need to be more clear about our expectations. I'll give you an example. If you are not doing what people thought you were going to be doing in your volunteer piece, would you not want to know about that? It's sort of analogous to someone lends you $5, you forget to pay them back, and a year later they said, you know, you never paid me that $5. And you're mortified, because what you wish the person would say is, remember, you owe me $5. It's the same sort of thing. One of the things I hear with volunteer groups is, I don't know if I'm doing a good job because everyone's so nice to me all the time. And I don't think they would ever tell me if I wasn't meeting the criteria that they set. I think we need to be more honest with each other. This was our expectation, so the person can say that was not, excuse me, that was not mine, and we negotiate that. Or, yes, I signed up for this and it turns out I'm not great at it, or I don't have the time. Those conversations have to happen between the person and whomever's upset about it, not about the person.
Great. There's some amazing questions in this chat box, but I'm going to head over to Louise Spencer next.
Hi, Gerri. Hi, everyone. Such amazing wisdom here. Just, I'm writing as fast as I possibly can. One of the things I just wanted to get your thoughts on when you were talking about, you know, that there's diversity of thought in a group, but also diversity of style. And I've found it's really essential to help people in the group really appreciate the diversities of style, and to ask them sometimes to give someone a chance. You know, if someone joins a new group and they say, wow, that person really comes on strong, or, you know, that person seems really quiet all the time, you know, and you kind of can say, well, just wait. You're going to find what a benefit that is to the group. And I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That is a way to form, again, as I pointed out earlier, to share our stylistic differences so people understand them. When I see diverse groups sitting around stylistically, and certainly in terms of expertise, I remind them together they're one perfect person. Thank goodness for the differences.
Right.
Because I worry, I don't know how many of you have ever done the Myers-Briggs, but when you do this with a group and there are quadrants and it shows styles, people get all excited when their group is in mostly one quadrant. And I get really nervous because they're missing so much. We need that diversity. We need people to think differently. We need people to react differently. Again, if we use that as a forming exercise, we now understand each other more. So I'm not thinking, well, you haven't said anything in the last 2 meetings, you don't care. But it turns out you're a person who assimilates information by not saying anything.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for the program. It's just amazingly rich.
You're a good friend, Louise.
Liz Tantarelli is up next, and then I see Scott has her hand raised, so we'll go to Michelle after Liz.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Gerri, for these ideas. I've been a volunteer with a lot of group for decades and decades. And even sometimes on the board of an all-volunteer group, there are people who say, oh yeah, I'd like to help, I can help, but they never take the lead, even if you try to give them the lead on a small part of a project. You know, you can't have a team entirely of leaders. But if you're dividing up a project, what do you do with those people who refuse to take responsibility even on a small part, to use their initiative to figure it out? That's my dilemma. Thanks.
Just to put this in some context, my research was the fear of success, or success sabotage, or success avoidance. And while I was doing this a long time ago, I came upon the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is that people think I can be a leader. People think I can be in charge. They don't know I'm not good at it. They don't know I'm shy. They don't know it's hard for me to ask people to do things. By the way, the imposter syndrome I saw across the board. Teachers who said, I don't know why the kids are looking at me. I partied in college. Every single person, it was very unnerving when medical people told me they had it. All I could picture was a surgeon looking over my body saying, isn't that funny? She thinks I can take her appendix out. So what we have to realize is we all have it in various ways. Most people who will not take the lead on something do not see themselves as leaders. It's an uncomfortable position. So can they be co-leaders? Can someone else take the lead and they do the bulk of the work? Often they're very willing to do that. Keep in mind, you see the business with children or with adults. You see what they can do often way before they see what they're capable of. I shouldn't say they, I should say we. We've all been in that position. So I think if you expected someone to take a lead, we have to sit down and say, it looks like this isn't happening. What would be a more comfortable structure for you? I also want to go back to the board of directors. Boards, we have this feeling that because we all care about the mission, that we're a coalesced group. Those are two different things. Caring about it and being a coalesced group require different skills, different time. We need to be paying attention to how we come together. And people on boards will tell you it took them 7 months to even understand the organization. So again, you know, when you're talking about the kinds of groups we're talking about here with open democracy, we already have something in common. That is so cool. That's so wonderful. That is just the beginning.
Thank you.
We have a couple of more minutes, Olivia, I think.
Yep, so we're going to go to Michelle Scott next.
Michelle.
Mute.
I have just a comment. I always think about a saying I heard where meetings are where minutes are taken and hours are lost. And that always makes me think when I'm running a meeting to try and keep it close. And the other thing that in the past few years, I've worked with a person, my friend Kathy Chapman, who has a unique talent of when she comes to a meeting, she makes a table, and in that table she puts action items. And so if you say you're going to do something, suddenly your name appears and what you were going to do. And then she says, and when would you have that done by? And she writes in the date. At the end of the meeting, everybody gets the action items and there's your name. And so it really helps people because periodically before your next meeting or during the month between meetings, you send out or comment on the action item list and you think, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. And I find it very helpful. So that's just my comment.
That's nice. And if someone is on that list and turns out, if I think I can do something, turns out I can't for a variety of reasons, and it may even include expertise, do I get to come back and say, I think someone else needs to take this piece?
Absolutely. That's the point of sending out the action item list from time to time to remind people to either do what they said they could do or say, you know, I really can't do that, or I tried and this didn't work out. Maybe someone else could do this, but it makes things happen. And then at the beginning of the meeting the next time, when you read the minutes, there's the action item list right there, and you have a new one at the end of that meeting. So it's a much more effective way to take notes at a meeting and to have things happen after it. So
very cool idea.
Great. There's 5 in the queue and we have 5 minutes left, but if we can't get to everybody, Gerri has nicely agreed to respond via email to some of the other questions, but I'm going to go to Joellen Cuff next.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a question. Meetings that we've had in the past in our town, we have a little social hour. It seems to break the ice, and people will seem to be a bit more productive in the meeting because the ice is already broken. And just a comment on that.
It is not a waste of time. It's essential time. And when people say, we don't have time to do that, my question is, do you have time not to? The time taken to socialize, to get to know each other will save so much time down the road, not to mention relationships. And you know, when I'm chatting with you over a snack, I now get a sense of your style and you get a sense of mine. I may find out things about you that I never knew, which helps our relationship. When we're talking about groups, we're talking not just about the work that has to be done, we're talking about building relationships. I can't think of a better way to do it than what you suggest.
Thank you.
Great. Laura Lynch. Laura off unmute.
Hi there. I don't know, but what was my question?
You typed it in a bit. You were talking about how you feel more that you work with some of the same people that sort of think more like you, and what's the best way to work on a team with people who feel differently.
That's true too. Thank you, Olivia, for reminding me what I wrote. Yeah, I just, when I first started doing activism in the area, I was part of fighting the Kinder Morgan pipeline. And we ended up with this base group that tends to do, even though we have our own separate organizations and our own separate lives and everything, when it comes to a project, when we come together, we all work so well together. And that's what I was saying about working with the same people. You know exactly who's going to do what and who's not going to do what. So my question is, I'm having trouble with my Temple Democrats to get even people just to volunteer to do anything. And I'm starting to learn. Thank you for everybody for all the information that you've been giving me, because it's starting to dawn in here that I can do this. So
we do have these presumptions about each other, which I share. You're a Democrat and you don't want to be active. That doesn't fit. And what we have to recognize is even positive stereotypes can sometimes get in the way of our expectations.
My problem is, if I don't see somebody doing what they're supposed to be or doing what they volunteered to do, I always feel like I have to pick up the pieces. And how do you stop yourself from doing that?
Ask them. Ask them, sit down and say, I find myself doing this. I don't think I should be doing it anymore. It's probably not something you can stop on your own, but you could ask for their help. When you say, okay, I'll do it, they say, I don't think you should, because we just talked about that.
Thank you.
Great. And I know there's more questions in the chat, but we want to give a minute or two break before we go on to Steve's presentation, which is really supposed to start at 10. So I want folks to sort of stretch their legs for a second, and we'll let Steve share his screen. But I see we have about 53 people on the call. So thank you and we'll have Gerri back at 11.
Thanks, everybody.